you. Please do conference in muted mode.
Really do better in terms of NRS attainment than those who are just in one or the other. And we'll have more specific data about that in just a second. Most ABE learners don't do well as pure DL learners. As probably most of you know, a lot of ABE learners struggle with that independent learning skill. Some of them have problems with the technology or access to the technology, and so those who only do distance learning often really do struggle. But all ABE learners do well, even in a hybrid setting. So even those who do classroom and some DL, you know, it's not a magic bullet for all of those. We have that teacher screening, orientation, ongoing support for those DL students is really, really essential so that they have someone to check in with, so that we find the right students right from the beginning, so that the student understands the expectations and how to use the programming. All of that has been really important. Found that it really can't be done effectively on the cheap. Requires an investment into the technology, training, staff time to really do it well. Yeah.
So here's some information that we've gathered both statewide and for local programs on the effectiveness of distance learning in Minnesota. This first chart is a statewide chart, I think, from last year. And we broke it apart into students that had greater than 50% of distance learning, all participants, and students with less than 50%. And as you can see, those with both, but less than 50% DL did by far best. So that supports our premise that pure DL for most of our learners is not necessarily the most effective way to go, but having some distance learning really does improve the learning experience for many, many students. This chart may be too small for you to see, but it's a breakdown by each of the RS areas levels, how they do. We also have some specific thoughts in terms of what their results were in terms of dual enrollment. Our consortium is called North Metro. Their level gains for distance learning for students that were in both the hybrid program were 76%, went up an RS level, versus only 50% for their students who were not involved in any distance learning. And then our Rosemount Apple Valley Regan program demonstrated that they had a 14% higher number of people who went up a level when they're in distance learning, as well as other kinds of classroom instruction. Some of the lessons, going back to the other lessons that we've learned, as mentioned, digital literacy is a really key component of being able to do distance learning. I noticed there were a question or two about the North Star project, which is that I manage and involved with. And for those of you who don't know, the North Star project has set up big benchmarks in a number of, I think, 8 different areas now for basic computer use, email, internet, etc. And then we've developed online assessments that assess people's ability to do those things. There, you can access those for free. I think it's digitalliteracy.assessment.org. Organizations can also become sponsor sites if they want. They pay their own database and be able to award certificates and so on. I also saw a question about the ability to remix those lessons. Unfortunately, that does not exist now because Captivate software for our building those, and it doesn't really lend to being remixed at the local level. It's also tied into a fairly complicated score base. So even if you were able to reorder the lessons, the score no longer worked. So just thought I'd mention that. We have learned that digitally and basic computer skills seem to do best when they're integrated into the classrooms rather than as standalone computer classes. And there's I think, still controversy about that. But in total, we really have adopted the stance that in computer skills, digital literacy, it's much better to do that as in an integrated approach than just a standalone approach.
Lesson learned is this idea of needing kind of both bottom-up and top-down buy-in into distance learning. So this bottom-up perspective increases the acceptance and use of DL. That's where the virtual task force comes in. That is made up of members who have gone through some of the professional development. And these are teachers, they're managers, they're people in the field, and they can bring new forms, they can bring questions, suggestions, and know that those are going to be discussed and then go up to the state level. So there's a real sense of ownership there. And there's a very broad approach to vetting of DL platforms for proxy hours. There are a lot of different DL platforms that we allow in Minnesota, which we'll also talk about in just a minute. That's kind of the bottom up, but there is also a lot of support at the state level, financially, which we've talked about a little bit, policy-wise, and that's also been very, very crucial. Platform selection. Minnesota does allow the use of several DL platforms, and most of these go through an approval process by the VTF. On applications from the field, so if a teacher or a manager comes across a new platform, they can bring it to the VTF, fill out an application for approval, have some discussion, and then we can have a new platform be approved. And this definitely fosters buy-in across the state. This is kind of a list of approved platforms, which is pretty long. They come in different categories. So we have state-supported, and where the state has bought a statewide license, and so these are available to any program in the state. And so we've got Pathways and Skills Tutor. There's also a number of free platforms, so any program can use those for free: Core Skills Mastery, MindQuest, and USA Learns. I have a long list of fee-based platforms. So these are approved, but a program would need to pay the fee themselves in order to make them available to their students.
Again, one of the lessons we keep learning and relearning is how key professional development is to success in distance learning. Even with really great intentions, just managers who haven't been able to assess that can really lead to pretty poor implementation, which then can lead to perception that distance learning is not effective and leads to a lack of support for it, when often it's more that the people involved just have done it before and don't know exactly how best to do it. And we really believe philosophically that professional development must be really comprehensive, and then it needs to be embedded. And as Nada went through some of the various ways in which we do professional development, we've tried to create a number of ways that people can access it, and we use digital literacy and distance learning to deliver things whenever possible, such as through our DL 101 and 102 courses, where we use webinars and phone conferencing and so on to do that. Somebody else, I noticed a question. Somebody had asked if there's a website for the VTF, and there's not a website. We use the Google group tool for having our discussions, and then we post the results on our main website after they're approved by the state. So to answer that. A little bit of impact to professional development, and the numbers I think are really very dramatic. St. Paul last year had 1,800 distance learning learners and over 52,000 hours. Minneapolis, which is our kind of sister city and actually a larger city, had only 43 distance learning hours learners and generated just a little over 2,000 hours. We have tried to compare some other cities and towns around the state that were somewhat similar in size. You can see the difference between Mankato, almost 5,000 hours, compared to Duluth and Chester that just each had a couple of hundred. And then we looked at some regions. Southwest ADU Marshall had almost 10 hours versus just about hours in the other two places. And we can really attribute that to is committed staff who complete professional development and then implement it in their ongoing programming. Some of the ideas, some of the thoughts we have about resources is that that is a piece that sometimes gets neglected. Some of the resources we've identified as important other than professional development are technology infrastructure, computers, and other equipment. And sometimes programs say, well, we can't do this, we don't have computers. And I think in this day and age, it's almost always possible to find some way of getting access to computers through federal grants, state funding, or other time. Teachers, you really can't just add distance learning on top of a teacher's current responsibilities without adding some time for them. So if they tried that and that really fails dismally, and then unfortunately usually ruins the prospects of implementing distance learning for a couple of years in those locations because people have had such a bad experience. At the same time, having mentors who really support distance learning and direct knowledge of how it should work and needs to work is really key. Staff need to be supported, teaching staff need to be supported, and help the managers to do what they need to do. We're really lucky in Minnesota. We have a lot of involvement and support for distance learning. We have 6 or 7 people that work in our state ABE office, and they've been very supportive and continue to do so. and the funding such as what we get for statewide coordination, policy development, and these kinds of accomplishments.
Distance learning can be really crucial for learners, because they may not have access to classrooms as much as they would like to. They've got work schedules, they've got children, but we're also finding that the expectations of how familiar and comfort they are with technology and distance learning is just growing in terms of workforce and higher education. Students who go on to post-secondary, more and more of those classes are done at least partially online or require assignments be submitted online, and so they really need to have a higher level of comfort with those technologies, and especially, if they're thinking about careers and transitioning to higher level jobs, they really need to have those technology skills.
I just thought I would answer a couple of the questions in the comment section so we don't get too far away. Where approved programs are listed, and there's a whole section on our website that lists all the approved distance platforms, has license information and proxy hour information, lots of resources downloaded and use with each of those, and they're free for anybody. You're certainly welcome to access. So that's how programs know what platforms are approved. Question about in an LMS that can be shared across institutions. This way, that's true. We do have our state professional development, the online courses that are hosted in that way, but really have each of the programs is currently independent. Conclude our presentation talking just a little bit about some of the challenges that we see looming as we all work to understand and begin implementing WIOA. And some of the things that we've come up with thus far, we know that WIOA strengthens and expands technology expectations, and I think there's a lot of questions about how this will be implemented. Aligning the college and career readiness standards and the ACES standards, which is a Minnesota thing, I believe, the last one, with expectations in WIOA. What we're now starting to see is developing new distance learning platforms that dynamically match resources to students. And it presents a challenge to the proxy hour model. And the way we determine proxy hours is observation of a number. A teacher observes a number of students completing a certain program or a certain set of lessons, estimates how much time it took, averages that out, and then goes through 2 or 3 iterations of that. So by the time they present a proposal to the virtual task force for approving a platform, there's a pretty good idea of what would be proxy hour equivalent. I think there's a lot of real good potential in these new platforms, which are dynamically matching resources to the needs of individual students through work they do online. The problem is that we have one platform that has over 600 resources, and it would be really impossible to find a proxy hour equivalent to each of those. We can use, some states do use online time, the time the student logged on, and we're starting to do that. But the problem with that is if the program doesn't have a way of often inactive for a certain length of time, like 15 minutes, you have an incredible number of hours, which are of course invalid. So that's kind of a challenge we're still working about. Also seeing students really having much more readily to mobile devices versus computers, and wanting to access resources on those mobile devices. But there's not a lot of compatible content right now from publishers. Some platforms work on mobile devices, some don't work very well. As far as I know, there aren't any that are specifically designed for phones and tablets and so on. And then the things that we're looking at doing here in Minnesota is aligning the various specific discipline curricula, platforms, et cetera, to various ABE target areas, such as GED, our new adult diploma, English language learning. It's pretty much up to the individual teacher to make those connections. So we're going to try to provide support and guidance for that. Other challenges that we're seeing here is we've gotten through pretty much all of our early adopters and trained them and benefited from their experience, trying to really make distance learning expertise an expectation for everybody. Renata mentioned our new online course, which is the minimal requirement for any teacher, manager, or support staff wanting to be involved in distance learning. And that's the ongoing need for financial resources to support distance learning, infrastructure and computers. We have a few tips for other states. First one is the need for some designated funding. You can't just add it on to what you're already doing. Secondly, maintaining buy-in at the state staff level, so the state staff really want this to happen. Third, the bottom-up thing that we were talking about earlier about listening to the changes and needs of local programs. All ongoing communication is important. That just is a key element for us. And showing in practical ways how distance learning can enhance learning for AB students. Some of the informal studies showed earlier with the outcomes for hybrid students, I think, are really persuasive to people. And offering a lot of professional development and other supports to help implement and maintain the distance learning.
If you have any questions, that's our contact information there. We'd be happy to answer any emails, and then that also has the website link that has a list of platforms and professional development links and news about DL in Minnesota.
Anna and Tom, that was great. And I know that we have a lot of questions that up, and so if we answer all of those for you today, then please do make note of Tom and Rick's email addresses, and you can follow that again, just in case we run out of time. So now we want to turn it over to, I believe, Marty. I give you, Marty, control of the screen, and you'll be able to scroll through the PowerPoint. And 7 to unmute yourself. Marty. Oh, there you go.
Marty's unmuting isn't working.
Right, I see that. Okay. Okay. Marty, it's 7. I assume you've tried that, but do you feel comfortable starting? I know you have these parts signed.
So you can go ahead and start.
Okay.
Don't want to hang it up.
Oh, control to you.
Okay.
There you go.
We took a similar approach. We wanted to kind of work through the history and how it's evolved to where our distance ed program is right now. We actually started back around 2003 when the opportunity to join Project Ideal, I guess, was very young. So it was just about the time that it started. Between the opportunity to do that and kind of recognizing that it had the potential to allow us to better serve or serve additional students, possibly impact our costs, all of the things that, that people have talked about, we decided to go ahead and take part in that. And it happened started in fiscal year 2003 and ran pretty much through 2006, our involvement with Ideal. And that was very, very key at the beginning. Gave us a lot of great ideas, gave us people to tap to, gave us some other folks, some peers out there that were really, in the same place that we were. So I think, one thing we learned early on is talking to other people was really, really important. Out of that, funded several pilot programs to explore distance education, and at that time we had quite a bit more PD than we have now because it was very new, and people weren't used to it, they hadn't heard about it, and they weren't quite as technology savvy, and we didn't have the same types of technology. So we had access to Project Ideal's professional development and those pilot programs, advantage of it, both face-to-face and online. Another thing that it did, because our data system at the time and the federal system, the NRS system at the time, really had just started to look at collecting distance learning pieces. So we did the data gathering separately, and that was a very key component too in ongoing decision making and in moving ahead and integrating distance ed into our data into the collection system. When 2006 rolled around, we began what was called a hub and referring partner model, primarily using a clock time model, primarily using a program like Tom had mentioned, one of those that does track the time, and trying to be very careful to find some that, at least in theory, would log somebody out if they didn't have activity over a period of time. We'll talk a little bit more about the hub and referring partner model because it is a little bit different as we go through here. But what that did was it got beyond the pilot folks and expanded the distance opportunities to more students through more programs without really adding a whole lot to the distance or to the current delivery systems. And we also began to look at offering distance to ESOL students. Hub and referring partner model, at the time we had, we alternated between 4 and 5 hubs. And the reason for that was because we weren't sure how much time it would take. There was still a lot more comfort with some face-to-face meetings between the staff. And we had several of the pilot programs that were very, very strong. So they became distance learning hubs. What they offered was they offered the distance learning instructor and so the program that was the referring partner, the program that had the students, didn't have to spend extra money for software. They didn't have to spend extra money for teachers or instructional hours, and they also didn't have to spend extra time on professional development. All of that was taken care of at the hub level. What the program got out of it was the program did get the student. The student and the hours all counted with their numbers. So that was kind of the beginning of a model that we've adapted, but we still have that we use currently. Consider what the partners' primary roles are, and that had much. There was one change there, which on the maintain student information into AbleLink, which is our data collection system that came around in 2013, which we'll talk a little bit about. And then this hub was responsible for. So there was a large focus in professional development with the hub. They provided some technical support back to the referring partner on maybe how to do some recruitment or how to work that into orientation, how to better serve their students as they came in. But probably the hub was one responsible for teaching the students and helping the program to integrate the distance ed. In fiscal year 2008, we had one larger, what we called large program at the time, or a larger urban program, Cincinnati Public Schools, that received some extra funding to begin to its own students, and we've gradually known that as the program-only model, meaning that the program was self-sufficient. We're really trying to come up with a better name. We're looking at program delivery. We called that program only, and they had some access to some distance ed software, and they also had some ideas on how they could do some partnerships. In particular, I believe there was a nursing project that they felt distance ed could really play a key role in. kind of look at 2008 to 2014. Our formal policy was developed in fiscal year 2011, and that policy took into account, takes into account the data entry. It takes into account what the responsibilities are if a program is self-sufficient, including the PD requirements that those programs have. Also specifies, some of the details that you've already heard about the different types of models, the NRS requirements, the NRS definitions, the Department of Ed definitions. All of those, that way they're easy in one place. And you can actually see our policy. It's online. Marty, maybe you can put the URL in the chat box, if you would. You don't feel left out. But you can see it online, and the policy then is reviewed and revised each year, except for the list of approved curriculum. And we do also have an approval process similar to what Minnesota said, although it's a smaller group. And that is revised whenever whenever a new product is approved. But the policy is usually just revised once a year unless there's some type of an exception. In fiscal year 2014, then there was another big jump, and that was when distance required in the ABLE grant application. So any program that was applying for ABLE funds had to write in distance ed and at least be prepared through one of those two models, through the hub model or through the program-only model. They had to be prepared to integrate or implement distance education. So phase 4, which is actually where Marty was going to pick back up. Do you happen to get on? Did you, Marty?
No, it looks like it.
Okay. One of the things that we did was we streamlined from the multiple hubs to a single statewide hub, and that hub is located at the Ohio Literacy Resource Center. We have multiple people that work on that. We took 3 of the distance ed teachers from the previous hubs, and we work with them to provide the instruction. A couple of us provide technical assistance and continue to provide our work in professional development as well. And we also began to do the data entry at the hub level. That was the big change, really, in the hub, other than consolidating from 4 down to 1, was that the entry came to a centralized location as well. We also have expanded. We have 16 approved curricula currently, and I believe there's 2 of them that have been submitted recently for us to take a look at. We did find our referral process into our online PD tracking system, which kind of has become a single place to go for everything PD events, PD records. Now we're actually distributing some materials that way, and also the refer piece. Let's read it to you. We're updating the required PD by job role. We do also have 2. We have 1 more extensive professional development offering that's a lot harder at instruction for those programs who are going to be teaching their own students. But then you have kind of distance ed basics. I'm not sure if it's real similar in content to what Tom and Minnesota had talked about, but it's just a very, very basic kind of ideas, the things that every program should know. Talks about recruiting, talks about retention, talks about blended learning. For the data entry people, talks about the different data entry rules and tips into AbleLink. Oh, Marty, she might be on. Are you on?
Can you hear me?
You are.
All right,
And
thanks.
you can take it from here.
Phone saved the day.
All right.
All right. Sorry about that. Hopefully I'm not sounding
You can
too
tell them
keen on-
everything I forgot and pick it up from here.
I don't know what you said. I was too busy trying to figure out why my phone wasn't working. So we left off with the distance education basics, correct?
Correct.
So what we're looking at doing for this next fiscal year is offering smaller pieces, smaller bits of training, 1 to 2 hours each, depending on job role and depending on what program model you have, so that spring partners and the program delivered have different needs than other, and also that if you're a data entry person, if you're a support staff, if you're an administrator, if you're a teacher, you're going to have different needs. So we will be updating the PD for that. Other things that we started doing, and you'll see this in a couple of slides, is that the state does purchase statewide license for hub use for a couple of different software programs. One of them that we've been using for a long time is SkillsTutor, also Rosetta Stone for ESOL. Last year, we also purchased for the hub use Common Core Achieve Online, ALEX, and TAPE ITTS. And just this year, just in fact on right now, we are purchasing statewide licenses for Rosetta Stone and SkillsTutor for use at Delivered, as well as for the hub. Working on a couple of different models of delivering distance education in addition to the software base, doing some of the learner mastery or the verification. So looking at some different types of delivery in addition to the clock time model that we have been using. And slide.
Here, I thought it was on break.
So now we actually have 3 different delivery options. So we had Hub and Referring Partner for quite a long time. We've had program delivered for several years, and we're also allowing a hybrid now, which the program may a large ABE but very small ESOL population, so they do their own distance education for ABE and refer to the hub maybe just for their 1 or 2 ESOL students that they have. Or if they have students that need additional assistance in math, they may refer them to the hub for something like that. So e-models are okay. Of the programs that we have had in their and over the course of 2008 through 2015, so the number of hubs, the number of RPs, the number of program delivered, and then just for this year, the number of hybrid. In the past, that you basically had to choose one or the other. Distance education is now required by the state in the grant, so they have to pick one of those models to include that in their grant. I was where I am thinking about the number of students that Minnesota has, and we now have a goal to reach. This is the enrollment and level completion for the last couple of years. So for education, Ohio, our threshold for reporting for the IRS is 50% or more delivered at a distance to be included in Table 4C and 5A. So that's why I see those 2 different models. So the first column is the total number of students in distance ed, and the percent completed then for all the students taking any amount of distance ed, and then just for the 50% or more. And we just have the state comparison in there. Some obvious changes. From 2011 through 2013, there were quite a few changes that happened in the state with competitive grants, reducing the number of programs, adjusting the structure of the PD system. So there are some shifts in numbers there. This was yesterday, and Sarah and you saying, can we update this? It was one of the things that we had realized is that there was going to be a question on cost. How much does it cost? So we put together some of the costs that were associated, broken out by instruction, development, and administration having to do with actual distance education, having to do with teaching and providing services to students at a distance. All going to be state-level coordination, support, professional development, and then data entry. So when we switched to the single hub model in 2013, you'll see some numbers switch from the first, second line. But this is an approximate cost on how much the distance education integration costs in Ohio. Again, the software costs, which is third line down. So in 2009, 2010, that very first one, we purchased 3-year licenses for Skills Tutor, which is why you had such a large amount then. And then that came to again in 2012. There's a question requiring distance education. Yes, all programs in the state are required to have a distance education component with their grant. And it doesn't have to be super fancy. They can say we're going to be a referring partner and refer to the hub. So that can be their distance education component, or they can do program delivered, or they can do a hybrid. But all programs are required to have the distance education component in their program of one of the types. Programs. It's not for all students, just that all programs need to have that option for students who are interested. Okay, learned. One of the things, and Minnesota said the same thing, and we have to echo that. That's why it's number one, is that state support of distance education is probably the number one. Not only do they need to provide funding for it, they need to provide support and information to programs. They need to champion it. They have to, implement policy, make it required in some cases. And without state support, it is extremely difficult to implement a statewide anything, especially distance education. Found that the more options that programs and students have, the better off they are. So being able to provide different models, whether it's program delivered or hybrid or hub, different software, different is all designed for the programs and also provides many, many options to students. The other, which we've been talking about for years and years, is that everybody needs to understand that distance education is not better, not necessarily better, not faster, not cheaper. It is not a panacea. It will not fix everything. It will not fill, a 3,000 student gap in your state if you're looking at adding more students, because it's not something that's cheap. Just a different option that may be best for students, whether it's a full-time distance education, part-time, but there's always the thought that the distance education is a super cheap way to go, and you just put someone in a room with a computer and they're good to go. It does take quite a bit of time and cost, but it is a good option for a lot of students. As we found out over the years, that sometimes what we originally started off with doesn't work. We need to make adjustments. Something happens with software. Tom was talking about, we're seeing this now, is that students want to do access through mobile devices, and some of the software that we have just does not work well with that. So we need to figure out what's going to be the best. So just making sure that all of the reporting is done consistently throughout all the programs, so that you don't have, like I believe it was Marcella saying, well, I'm going to count that Prem A says, well, if the student's distance ed one student, and if they're in class, they're a different student. And so obviously that doesn't work. And even just making sure that from program to program that what you're reporting is the same thing. Next.
A few lessons learned, and I did want to kind of go back and reiterate to what Tom and Marty had mentioned, that really I do a lot of the supporting of the teachers who are at the hub, who are supporting the students, and the mobile devices, especially the tablets, it seems, are very, very popular, and a lot of the publishers are behind in making theirs, making products compatible. It's interesting, because that's what you seem to hear a lot about with the tablets, is it's going to revolutionize education, but then a lot of these things can't be used or can't be used well, or you have to buy an alternate browser, or they only have some pieces of the curriculum that works well on those mobile devices. And now we have more and more students that they feel that their phone is going to be their primary device. And even if something works on a tablet, it doesn't necessarily work on a phone, or it doesn't necessarily work well just because of limited amount of space. So that has been a real challenge that we have just kind of worked through by looking at what's available with products, not getting rid of my old phones so I can try things out on different phones. And it really is something that I should have seen coming, but I didn't see coming, that all of a sudden was a pretty big issue. One of the other things that I think was really important is getting DE integrated into the program. I think at first, when we started to really push it out to all of the programs, they did think that it was a magic bullet. And when they saw that it wasn't necessarily a magic bullet, it got set over to the side, and it may or may not have gotten thought about. But now I think we're getting more and more programs to look at it and see, okay, can this help my student? You know, as Marty said, perhaps maybe they just need a little bit of help in math, so we're going to enroll them in ALEKS, or you know, they can't make much, they can't get too many classes, but they can do quite a bit of work online. So that's really been a big thing that we've had to work with, is we've really had to communicate, talk to our programs, and let them know exactly what distance is, talk about their successes, and really push hard to get our distance ed teachers at the hub level to communicate when a referring partner refers a student. Cases, we know which classroom teacher referred that student, and if that student is also doing some face-to-face work. And our hub teachers, our distance teachers, are very good about communicating back and forth with that classroom teacher. So it's not done in isolation. And I think that that's been something that's very important. There's a question. Support student distance, no class time. We do, and Marty, I don't know that there is any actual way to, well, I guess you could tell with a different report. I don't think we have very many students that do just distance. I think that they do, that them at least do a little bit of class or a little bit of face-to-face time. But if that is what works out for the students beyond the orientation and the assessments where they do have to come into the program, if that's what works out with the students, there's nothing that prevents that. There's nothing that says we won't support a student that way.
Right. Maybe if part of the question was that for the hub only provides instruction at a distance. There is no there is no in-person class or program associated here. That once the student is referred to hub, the only type of instruction and support we provide is at a distance. If students are needing additional assistance, they need to be reassessed, that they need more in assistance, then the distance education teacher works with the referring classroom teacher to get the student back into class and some additional support in person that they might need. Young teachers, right, they're different from the classroom teachers for the hub. And in some cases, at a local program, the local teacher, the classroom teacher may also function as a distanciation teacher, but no, in this instance, we do have an instructional program at the OLRC. The only instruction that we provide is at a distance to students who are referred from a local program. We don't have our own students at all. That's a good one. The distance ed, the hub teachers, some between, and again, this is getting roles back and forth. It's somewhere, I would say, Tim, between would you say 300 to 400 students a year for each teacher? Okay.
I would say that's a good range, and it does come in waves. There are times when they're just, we're going to wear them out or burn them out, and there are other times where they're aided some software and put together some documentation and things for us because they just don't have that many students. But overall, I would say that probably closer to 500, I think, Marty.
All of the distance education teachers who we work with, they are also classroom teachers for a local program. So they also do instruction at their own local program, and this is their half-time job or whatever. This is a expertise for them, so they also maintain contact within their own programs. Persistence for distance ed has been very good. I'm sure I could get my hands on that quickly for you. But so far, that
I just wanted to catch everybody up and make sure that the questions are typed into the chat pod.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Everyone follow along. That's fine.
They are full time with both of their. They may most of them do a lot of work in the evening because that's when the students are there.
To hear from Minnesota, if you could press *7 to hear about how many, the answer to the same question about how much your distance ed instructor supports and what full-time or part-time.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
We don't have generally separate distance learning instructors that only do distance learning. So we don't really can't provide a number of students per staff. Most teachers, and it's really up to the individual program or consortia, staff that do both traditional adult basic ed as well as some distance learning. So I don't think we provide that formula in terms of numbers per teacher very easily.
And what does your student persistence look like?
I think I'm judging by the, that would be a good thing to look at is the actual number of hours per learner, but looking at the NRS attainment levels for students that are in a hybrid type setting, they're good. So I would take it from that they're persisting at least long enough to go up in NRS level by and large.
Just do a quick check. Last year, the distance learners had a retention or level completion of about 83% overall. There and just to keep in mind that at the local programs, there are a number of teachers who may function solely as ed teachers at local programs for those programs which have a high distance ed population, and that some of the other ones that they will do both classroom and distance as well. This is the teacher that we have at the hub that was speaking specifically about them. Just to clarify.
Thanks for that. Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Missed your question, Alejandro, and that's a good question. I answer that right off the top of my head because we don't, track that closely what each of our teachers and each of our programs are doing. I can think of a couple of programs that's quite possible that they work in that sort of situation with a workplace. I will check and follow up on that and get you an answer if we have any experience, or let you know that no, in fact we don't. Didn't mean to jump over your question there. And your question, our hub teachers are by the hour, and they're paid as contractors. Ours aren't actually employees of the OLRC for a variety of reasons, one of which is trying to get them higher at a university and all the red tape and everything. So probably what we're paying them actually an hour is probably a little bit more, but what it actually works out to, I'm afraid, is probably a little bit less.
I would say in Minnesota that we most of us, we have both part-time and full-time teachers. They are not paid by the learner or anything by that, but they're paid by the number of hours that they're on for. So they might be full-time, they might be part-time, and there's hands-on. It may be a mixture of different duties, but we certainly don't pay them by the hour in terms of, by the learner in terms of how many learners they're working with, and they're paying hourly rates as any other ABE teachers. And there's a lot from one program to another around the state.
Okay, I have about a minute left, so I just wanted to allow you to wrap up. If you have any questions for or Marty, you can email them at the email addresses, or if you email the NRS at AIR.org, and we'll put to you the our address. We can forward questions to any of our presenters to help you with them. I want to mention that you will be receiving shortly our next day of innovation of the webinar, and I encourage you to please complete that. It really helps us to improve and get ideas for our next webinar series. Thank you so much again to our wonderful and very informative presentations. I want to thank all of you who stayed or called in or to participate. I appreciate your understanding of the technical issues we had, and hope that you now have a much better understanding about how you can implement distance learning in your state or program. Thank you, and we will see you at our next webinar.
Connected.